As Ukraine prepares for its offensive against Russia, Russia is unexpectedly dusting off and deploying tank fleets from Cold War era to the front lines. These fleets consist of T-55 and T-62 tanks, which originally emerged in the 1940s and are predominantly found in museums today. It is surprising that Russia is resorting to such outdated equipment, as it appears they are scraping the bottom of the barrel. This, therefore, raises the question of why Russia is relying on antiquated resources. Several factors contribute to the Russian evident preparation of Cold War tanks for combat in Ukraine, with the primary and most apparent reason being the significant loss of their tanks. Based on data from multiple sources, prior to the conflict in Ukraine in 2022, Russia had a significant number of tanks. According to a report by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, when Russia initially entered Ukraine last year, they possessed approximately 3,000 functional tanks. Some even estimated that Russia possessed approximately 12,420 tanks and 36,000 armored vehicles. This included several thousand T-72, 3,000 T-80, and approximately 200 T-90. While not all of these tanks were immediately deployed to the front lines, a substantial portion were part of the initial invasion force. However, as Ukraine received military support from Western countries, which included anti-tank weaponry like javelins, the number of Russian tanks rapidly declined due to being completely destroyed. Within the first year of the war, over 1,000 tanks were either lost or captured by opposing forces. An intelligence organization in the Netherlands, Oryx, reported that there is visual evidence confirming the destruction or capture of at least 1,900 Russian tanks since the beginning of the invasion. This accounts for approximately 2/3 of the initial invasion force, although some reports suggest the number could be as high as 3,511 tanks. The T-72, which formed the majority of the Russian tank forces, has particularly suffered in the war. Consequently, Russia was compelled to tap into its reserves of tanks, resorting to antiquated technology. For these reasons, T-55, T-62, and BTR-50s were retrieved from storage, given necessary maintenance, and transported to the front lines via trains. It is estimated that Russia had around 2,800 T-55s and 2,500 T-62s stored in reserve. Another crucial factor at play to the Russians' decision deploying outdated tanks is the inability of new tank production to keep pace with the rate of vehicle loss. Uralvagonzavod, one of the main tank plants in Russia, has a monthly production capacity of around 20 tanks, provided all necessary components are available. However, with an average loss of approximately 150 tanks per month in Ukraine, there is no feasible way to replenish the diminishing number of Russian tanks with newly manufactured ones. Thus, despite the limited capabilities of the Russian Cold War-era tanks, there is an increasing number of them being deployed even in the certain areas on the front lines. This revelation may not be surprising, considering that Ukrainian forces have captured at least 544 Russian tanks since the conflict began, with 79 of them being damaged and another 65 being completely abandoned. Sanctions have also played a major role in Russia's decision to bring the T-55 and T-62 tanks out of retirement. At the outset of the conflict, Western nations imposed severe sanctions on Russia with the hope of crippling its economy and pressuring Vladimir Putin to withdraw his forces from Ukraine. However, this strategy did not yield the intended results, as experts anticipated that the immediate impact of the sanctions would be limited. Instead, the implemented sanctions would have long-term consequences, which are currently unfolding in Russia. According to the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, Russia's GDP declined by 2.1% in 2022 as a result of the sanctions. Due to the sanctions that have been in place for over a year, Russia is facing challenges in obtaining the necessary parts and technology to efficiently manufacture more tanks. Another factor driving the reactivation of T-55 and T-62 tanks is their relative simplicity compared to modern tanks. This simplicity offers advantages for Russia on multiple fronts. It is more efficient to train new soldiers on operating Cold War-era technology than providing training on complex modern tank technology. This is particularly applicable to the T-55 tanks, which date back to the 1950s and have simpler components and basic targeting systems. In regard to the current state of their tanks, Russia's decision to deploy these outdated tanks is significant. Although Ukraine receives support from Western nations and has access to Western technology, Ukraine is commonly recognized as the disadvantaged party in the situation. Sierra Leone, a defense studies lecturer at King's College London, argues that Russia's older tanks might ultimately have a meaningful impact. This is because, despite claims that Russia has been scraping the barrel since the onset of the conflict, Russia is still actively engaged in the fighting and possesses substantial reserves of hardware and assets. Russian forces have shifted their focus to defensive positions rather than launching offensives by using the old tanks to the battlefield. Therefore, this is another compelling reason why Cold War tanks are being retrieved from storage, refurbished, and deployed with minor modifications to their outdated technology. The T-55 and T-62 tanks have tactical capabilities better suited for defensive operations. Soldiers in these tanks are likely to provide long-range supporting fire instead of pushing forward along the front lines. The Kremlin is likely aware that these tanks will be unable to overcome the Western weapons advancing towards the front line for the offensive. However, if Russia can continue to deploy outdated tanks to obstruct the Ukrainian military, they may eventually exhaust their forces. Hence, T-55 and T-62 tanks may soon be the only obstacle preventing Ukrainian forces from achieving a decisive victory in the war. Moreover, while Ukraine may have an advantage in terms of quality by having supplies of 230 NATO tanks, Russia, despite its losses, still maintains superiority in quantity. Recent reports indicate that Russia could potentially deploy up to 5,000 older tanks in the conflict. Thus, this becomes a significant turning point in the situation. Despite Russia deploying older tanks, rumors have once circulated claiming that Russia has utilized its newly introduced T-14 Armata battle tanks. According to the RIA state news agency, the T-14 Armata was reportedly engaged in combat with Ukrainian defensive positions in an undisclosed location within the conflict zone, but it did not participate in direct assaults. These speculations gained traction between January and February of 2023, although concrete visual evidence to substantiate these claims remained elusive. What do you think? That's all for today. Thanks for watching.